His story of survival has inspired millions.
Keep him there, keep him calm, okay?
A gripping example of how our will to live can overcome the most dire situations.
Incredible survival stories are some of the most mind-blowing tales of human endurance, where people face impossible odds and make it out against all expectations.
My name's Aaron Ralston. My parents are Donna and Larry Ralston.
There's one story that stands out. A Japanese soldier who survived for decades in a cave, and a plane crash survivor who defied the odds in ways Hollywood couldn't even dream up. In this video, we'll tell the most incredible survival stories you've ever heard. Japan WW2 soldier who refused to surrender, Hiroo Onoda, dies. Imagine spending almost 30 years in a jungle, convinced war was still raging when it ended decades ago. This was the life of Hiroo Onoda, a Japanese soldier who refused to surrender after World War II. Sent to a small island in the Philippines in 1944, Onoda's orders were clear: keep fighting no matter what. Even when the war ended, he believed it was all a trick and ignored every attempt to convince him to stop. Leaflets were dropped from the sky and search parties were sent, but nothing worked. To him, surrendering was not an option. For nearly 30 years, Onoda and a few fellow soldiers hid in the jungle, surviving on what they could find or take from locals. His comrades either surrendered or died one by one, leaving Onoda alone. In 1974, his former commanding officer was flown in to order him to stand down personally. Only then did Onoda finally accept the truth, emerging from the jungle. Still dressed in his tattered uniform and carrying his samurai sword, when he returned to Japan, Onoda was treated as a hero. But the country he had left behind was unrecognizable, modern, bustling, and nothing like the Japan he had fought for. Struggling to fit into this new world, he moved to Brazil, starting a new life as a rancher. Japan always called him back. He set up survival schools to teach young people the skills he had honed during his decades in the jungle. Though celebrated by many, Onoda's legacy was complicated. While some admired his loyalty and dedication, others in the Philippines could not forgive him for the lives lost during his years of guerrilla warfare. Onoda passed away at 91, having lived a life defined by duty, survival, and a refusal to give up. Imagine being trapped in a foreign land for years, believing the world has moved on without you. Shoichi Yokoi lived that reality, surviving in a jungle for 28 years, facing the harshest elements and his isolation. But before we proceed further, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. The incredible survival story of Aaron Ralston. Aaron Ralston was an adventurous man who loved the outdoors. On April 26, 2003, he went hiking alone in Utah's Blue John Canyon. It was a beautiful day until disaster struck. As he climbed over a boulder, it suddenly moved and trapped his right arm against the canyon wall. He was completely alone and unable to call for help. For 5 long days, Aaron struggled to free himself from the 800-pound rock. He tried everything he could think of, but nothing worked. As time passed, he realized he had to make an impossible choice. He broke the bones in his forearm and, using a dull pocket knife, amputated his own arm below the elbow. This painful decision took him about an hour, but it was his only chance to survive. Once free, he climbed down a 60-foot cliff and walked for 5 miles until he found other hikers who helped him get to safety. News of his bravery spread quickly, and his former classmates at Carnegie Mellon University were not surprised by his strength. They knew Aaron as someone who was always full of energy and adventure. Aaron faced his challenges with a positive attitude. He appreciated life more after the accident and got back to climbing mountains. He also started giving talks to share his story and inspire others to be safe outdoors. His friends traveled from all over to support him after the accident. They played football in Central Park and celebrated the fact that Aaron was alive. His story is a powerful reminder to live life to the fullest and never take a single moment for granted. Aaron Ralston's journey teaches us about courage, resilience, and the will to survive against all odds. His experience will stay in our hearts, inspiring us to embrace life with open arms. Trapped 100 feet below the ocean's surface, Harrison O'Keefe defied all expectations. After a freak accident, he found himself in an underwater world of darkness, struggling to survive in what seemed like an inescapable nightmare. Harrison O'Keefe, the accidental aquanaut. Harrison O'Keefe's story is of survival, faith, and quick thinking. In May 2013, Harrison was working as a cook on the Jascon 4 tugboat off the coast of Nigeria when disaster struck. While he was in the bathroom, a massive wave flipped the boat, sending it 100 feet to the bottom of the ocean. Harrison was trapped inside, the boat quickly filling with water. He tried to open the door, but it was jammed. Eventually, he found himself in an air pocket, his only lifeline in the darkness. Alone, Harrison could hear the desperate cries of his crewmates, but soon the shouts faded. He knew he had to stay calm to survive. Panic, he said, would kill him faster than drowning. The key was to keep his mind sharp and not waste the little oxygen he had. To keep himself alive, Harrison found 2 life jackets with torches, a small stash of sardines, and a can of cola in an incredible stroke of luck. These would be his supplies for nearly 3 days as he floated in the air pocket, waiting for help. Crayfish crawled at his skin in the water around him, but Harrison remained focused. Each time he swam out of his air pocket for a way out. He tied a rope made from torn fabric to guide him back to safety. The ship was upside down, disorienting him further, and in total darkness, finding his way back to the air pocket was his only chance to stay alive. Though he tried to reach an exit many times, he had to return repeatedly, as his breath wouldn't last long enough to open the doors. For nearly 3 days, Harrison remained in this harrowing situation. Then, something miraculous happened. Divers arrived, assuming they were only retrieving bodies. But when a hand reached out and grabbed one of them, they realized Harrison was alive. Body cam footage of the rescue shows the divers' shock as they pulled Harrison from the wreckage. Despite this terrifying experience, Harrison found himself still drawn to the water. In 2015, he faced his fear head-on and retrained as a diver. Now, he works underwater, repairing oil and gas facilities, diving even deeper than the shipwreck that nearly claimed his life. Harrison's incredible story is one of survival, courage, and determination. He now embraces the very thing that almost took his life. Having faced his greatest fear once and for all, Julianne Koopska fell from the sky, surviving a plane crash that left her alone in the depths of the Amazon rainforest. With no one around, she navigated through the wilderness, fighting for survival with nothing but her will to live. Julianne Koopska survived a plane crash. On Christmas Eve in 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Koopska's life changed forever. She and her mother were flying over the Peruvian rainforest on Lanza Flight 508 when their plane was struck by lightning. The aircraft broke apart midair, and Julianne fell over 10,000 feet, still strapped to her seat. Miraculously, she survived the fall. When she woke up, she was alone in the dense Amazon jungle. The crash had claimed the lives of everyone else on board, including her mother. Despite suffering injuries, a broken collarbone and deep cuts, Julianne's survival instincts kicked in. Her parents, both zoologists, had taught her a lot about the rainforest, and now those lessons were about to save her life. Julianne knew the jungle was harsh, but not as deadly as people imagined. She found a small creek and followed it, walking in the water because it was safer than the jungle floor, where snakes and other dangers lurked. Along the way, she had no food except for a small bag of sweets she found in the wreckage, and she had to endure painful insect bites and sweltering heat during the day, with cold, wet nights. On her journey, Julianne came across wreckage from the crash, including a bench with 3 bodies, which shook her deeply. But she pushed on, determined to survive. As days passed, her injuries worsened, and maggots infested a wound on her shoulder. Using her knowledge from her parents, she treated it with gasoline she found at an abandoned workers' shelter, even though it was incredibly painful. After 10 days of wandering through the rainforest, weak and alone, Julianne finally found hope. She stumbled upon a large boat and realized she was near civilization. The next morning, forest workers discovered her. At first, they were shocked, thinking she was some forest spirit from local legends. But when she spoke to them in Spanish, they understood her story. The men took her to a nearby village, and she was eventually airlifted to a hospital, where she was reunited with her father. Sadly, Julianne learned that her mother had survived the crash but died days later from her injuries. Despite the trauma, Julianne continued her parents' work at the Panguana Research Station. Her incredible story of survival is a testament to her courage and knowledge, turning an unimaginable nightmare into a remarkable tale of endurance. After a devastating crash in the mountains, Annette Herfkens faced an unimaginable reality. She was the only one left. Struggling through injuries and harsh conditions, her resilience and determination led her to safety when hope seemed lost. Annette Herfkens, a sole survivor of plane crash. On November 14, 1992, Annette Herfkens, a Dutch banker, boarded a plane in Vietnam with her fiancé Willem. They were excited about a romantic vacation and looked forward to spending time together after busy schedules. Annette was a top bond trader, one of the few women in her field. As their flight neared its destination, something went wrong. 6 minutes before landing, their plane crashed into a mountain in the Vietnamese jungle. When Annette regained consciousness, she found herself surrounded by wreckage and silence. At first, she could hear faint voices, but soon realized she was the only one alive. Her fiancé, Willem, the love of her life and college sweetheart, didn't survive. Annette was injured and alone in the jungle, with nothing but rainwater to keep her going. For 8 long days, she lay there, hoping for rescue. During those days, she faced unimaginable pain and grief, but she never gave up. With sheer determination, she managed to survive until rescuers finally found her. Back home, newspapers had already printed her obituary, assuming she had died in the crash. But Annette defied the odds and lived to tell her story. Surviving the plane crash was just one part of Annette's incredible journey. Years later, her biggest challenge came when her son, Maxie, was diagnosed with autism. As a mother, she was determined to give him the best life possible, no matter the challenges. Raising Maxie required immense patience, love, and resilience. But Annette was no stranger to tough battles. She often thought back to those 8 days in the jungle, drawing on the strength she found during her ordeal to stay optimistic through life's ups and downs. Despite her tragedies and hardships, Annette's story is one of survival, hope, and unwavering optimism. She broke barriers as a female banker on Wall Street. Still, her real triumph lies in her spirit, the way she survived alone in the jungle, and how she continues to navigate the complexities of raising an autistic son with love and courage. Annette now lives in New York and shares her story with the world through her book, Turbulence. She reflects on the pain of losing Willem and surviving the crash and the beauty she's found in life's most unexpected places. Her journey is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of hope. In the freezing Arctic, Ada Blackjack endured isolation and extreme cold to become a symbol of survival. Her strength and courage against overwhelming odds make her story one of the most extraordinary tales from the frozen north. The incredible heroine of the Arctic, Ada Blackjack. Ada Blackjack was born in a remote Alaskan settlement called Spruce Creek around 1898 or 1899. Life was tough for her from the start. When she was just 8 years old, her father died of food poisoning, and her mother sent Ada and her sister to a Methodist mission school in Nome. There, Ada learned to read English and sew, skills that later proved invaluable. At 16, she married a man named Jack Blackjack, who had been a dog sled driver and hunter. The marriage was troubled, and Jack was abusive. Ada had 3 children, but only one survived infancy, her son Bennett. Eventually, Jack abandoned them, and Ada divorced him. With Bennett in her care, Ada walked 40 miles to Nome to join her mother, hoping to make a better life. She cleaned houses and sewed for miners, but it still wasn't enough to afford treatment for Bennett, who had tuberculosis. Heartbroken, Ada had to place him in a children's home where he could get the medical care he needed. Determined to earn money to reunite with Bennett, she searched for opportunities. One day, the police chief in Nome told Ada about an Arctic expedition led by Canadian explorer Alan Crawford. They were looking for an Inuit person to join their crew, and since Ada could sew and speak English, he thought she'd be a good fit. Desperate to provide for her son, she agreed to go, though she had doubts about the journey. In 1921, Ada and 4 men set off to Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, to claim the land for Canada. The mission seemed manageable at first, but after a year, food became scarce. In January 1923, 3 men tried to cross the frozen sea to find help, leaving Ada behind with a sick crewmate, Lorne Knight, who had scurvy. She nursed him for months, but Knight died in June, and Ada was left completely alone, except for the camp's cat, Victoria. Ada survived for the next 8 months by learning to hunt, build shelters, and sew clothing out of animal skins. Finally, in August 1923, she was rescued. Though the press hailed her as a hero and called her a female Robinson Crusoe, Ada wanted no part of the fame. She used the money she earned to take Bennett to Seattle for treatment. Ada remarried, had another son, and eventually returned to the Arctic, where she lived until she was 85. she died quietly, having lived a life full of hardship, resilience, and strength. Stranded in Antarctica with no way out, Sir Ernest Shackleton led his men through one of the harshest environments on Earth. His unwavering leadership and sheer determination turned what could have been a tragic story into a remarkable tale of survival. The survival story of Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was born on February 15, 1874, in County Kildare, Ireland, and moved to England with his family when he was 10. From a young age, his love of reading sparked a thirst for adventure. After an unremarkable school life, Ernest left at 16 to join the Merchant Navy, where he traveled the world, learning skills to shape his future expeditions. Shackleton's first taste of the polar world came in 1901, when he joined Captain Robert Scott's Antarctic expedition on the Discovery. He was sent home early due to health issues, but only after helping set a record for the farthest journey south at the time. His early exit didn't shake his drive to explore. It set him on a path toward becoming one of the most famous figures of Antarctic exploration. In 1907, Shackleton led his expedition, the Nimrod, aiming to reach the South Pole. While he didn't make it to the pole, he came closer than anyone before him, missing it by just 97 miles. For this achievement, King Edward VII knighted him, and his reputation as a fearless leader began to grow. However, Shackleton's most famous expedition was the Endurance mission, which started in 1914. His goal was to cross Antarctica from one side to the other. But things went differently than planned. The ship got stuck in ice and eventually sank, leaving the crew stranded on the floating ice of the Weddell Sea. Shackleton's leadership shone as he guided his men through treacherous conditions. In a remarkable feat, he led a small team on an 800-mile journey in a lifeboat to South Georgia, where they sought help. Miraculously, his crew survived, and Shackleton became known for his unwavering determination and care for his men. Despite his adventures, Shackleton struggled in his personal life. His business ventures failed, and he died deeply in debt. In 1921, during his final Antarctic expedition, Shackleton died of a heart attack while anchored in South Georgia. He was buried there at his wife's request. Though overshadowed by other explorers during his lifetime, Shackleton's legacy grew over time. His resilience and leadership in the face of adversity became legendary, with many viewing him as the ultimate example of courage and perseverance in extreme conditions. The Titanic's sinking left many lost to the icy waters, but some made it out alive. Their survival stories are filled with courage, heartbreak, and the will to fight for a second chance at life in the face of unimaginable loss. Titanic Real Survivor Story. On a cold but sunny Wednesday, April 10, 1912, the Titanic, the pride of the White Star Line, set sail from Southampton. This grand ship, hailed as unsinkable, was on its first voyage under the command of Captain Smith, who was about to retire after this journey. A crowd gathered to see her off, not knowing the tragic story that was about to unfold. The Titanic was not just a ship, but a floating palace designed for luxury. On board were some of the richest and most influential people, carrying assets that would be worth millions by today's standards. However, for the wealthiest passengers, the Titanic felt formal and distant. One passenger recalled a young boy in an elevator, proudly saying, "Madam, it's quite an honor. I'm only 14, but we sleep 6 to a room." The ship's luxurious side was enjoyed by those on upper decks, with live music, American ragtime dances, and lavish dining rooms that looked like they were straight out of grand homes. Then came the night of April 14, 1912. It was meant to be a night of celebration, but at 11:40, post-meridium, everything changed. The Titanic struck an iceberg. Initially, the impact was so light that some thought nothing of it. One man even remarked, "Look, it's an iceberg, and it's massive." Passengers picked up ice chunks and threw snowballs, unaware of the danger. As the reality of the situation set in, lifeboats were prepared, but there weren't enough. Women and children were put in the boats first. Some passengers were hesitant to leave, convinced they would be back for breakfast, as one woman locked up her room, took her valuables, and boarded a lifeboat reluctantly. A miniature painter told her, "You'll have to jump into the boat." Her reply, "Jump? What do you think I am, an acrobat?" She eventually made it, but only after a sailor threw her stuffed pig into the boat. The Titanic slowly disappeared into the icy waters, taking over 1,500 lives with her. While 703 passengers survived, the majority who perished were from the third class, restricted from accessing the upper decks. As the ship sank, some claimed to hear the band playing until the end. Others disagreed, calling it a lie. Survivors in the lifeboats were silent, waiting for rescue, haunted by the thought of being pulled under by the sinking ship. At 2:20 ante meridiem on April 15, 1912, the Titanic was gone. Douglas Mawson's survival in Antarctica is a forgotten hero's tale of endurance. Faced with the freezing wilderness and the loss of his crew, he pushed his body and mind to their absolute limits, refusing to surrender to nature's brutal force. The Forgotten Hero, Douglas Mawson's epic Antarctic survival. In the early 1900s, Douglas Mawson led an Antarctic expedition unlike any other. Unlike his more famous peers, Scott, Shackleton, and Amundsen, Mawson wasn't chasing the glory of reaching the South Pole. Instead, he was driven by a passion for science. He explored a vast, unknown stretch of Antarctica, south of Australia. Little did he know this journey would become one of the greatest tales of survival. Mawson's team needed to be filled with seasoned explorers. Most of the men were young, with little to no experience. Many of them hadn't even seen snow before. Despite this, Mawson's leadership and vision guided them as they set up camp at Commonwealth Bay, which they quickly learned was the windiest place on Earth. The constant howling winds and freezing temperatures made every task a challenge, yet they pushed on. The real test began when Mawson and two of his teammates, Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Ninnis, embarked on a daring 350-mile trek. Their goal? To chart unknown territory. Everything seemed to go well at first, until disaster struck. Ninnis and most of their food and supplies disappeared into a hidden crevasse, leaving Mawson and Mertz in a dire situation. With limited food and exhausted dogs, they made the heart-wrenching decision to start killing their dogs for meat. As they continued, Mertz's health deteriorated rapidly. Despite Mawson's best efforts, Mertz died, leaving Mawson alone, over 100 miles from safety, with almost nothing to survive on. In the cold, with no dogs and no food, he faced an impossible task, returning to base camp alone. Mawson was in rough shape. His body was falling apart, literally. His feet were in such bad condition that the skin had come loose and his hair fell in clumps. He documented everything in his diary, convinced that someone would find his notes even if he didn't make it. At one point, Mawson fell into a crevasse, dangling by a rope attached to his sled. He almost gave up, ready to let go and end his suffering. But then, a verse came to his mind. It's dead easy to die. It's the keeping on living that's hard. Somehow, he found the strength to climb out and kept going. After weeks of unimaginable hardship, Mawson finally reached base camp, only to find that the ship had left hours earlier. Trapped for another brutal Antarctic winter, Mawson and the remaining men waited for rescue. When they finally made it home, Mawson was knighted, yet the tragic race to the South Pole overshadowed his story. But his incredible determination and survival remain one of history's greatest feats. Lost at sea for 49 days, a young teen survived on nothing but fish and seawater. With no supplies and no way to control his raft, he held on to life in the vast ocean, proving that survival is about more than just endurance. It's about never giving up. Surviving the ocean, the teen who held on for 49 days. In July, a 19-year-old named Aldil Galong was caught in an unbelievable survival story that would leave anyone in awe. He found himself drifting alone at sea for 49 days without food, water, or a way to steer his raft, surviving against all odds. It all started on July 14th, when a sudden storm snapped the rope holding his floating hut in place. The powerful winds sent Aldil's small wooden fishing raft, drifting 200 miles from Indonesia toward the open Pacific Ocean near Guam. With his supplies running out quickly, Aldil faced a fight for survival. He was alone, lost in the vast ocean, and had to think fast to stay alive. Like something straight out of Life of Pi, Aldil used whatever he could find. He used pieces of wood from the raft to start fires for warmth and caught fish from the sea to eat. To quench his thirst, he filtered seawater through his shirt. Every day he tried to spot ships on the horizon. Sadly, despite his best efforts to signal them, no one seemed to notice him. The days he dragged on, with Aldil surviving on sheer willpower. He spent 7 weeks like this, every moment a fight against hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. But on the 49th day, when hope seemed to be running out, a huge tanker appeared on the horizon. Aldil was so weak, he wasn't sure if he could make it. But with everything he had left, he jumped into the rough waters, swimming toward the ship. Seeing his desperate struggle, the crew threw him a life preserver and pulled him on board. The huge swells of the ocean nearly capsized his raft, but Aldil held on tightly to the rope ladder the crew threw. It was the moment he had been waiting for, his rescue. He had clung to life through sheer determination against all odds. In an emotional interview after his rescue, Aldil explained how he had been stranded for so long with only a portable radio to try and call for help. The raft he had been working on for 3 years had gone adrift for the 3rd time, and he had no way of steering it back to land. His employer provided him with a 2-way radio, which eventually allowed him to send a distress signal. When asked if he would ever go back to the raft, Aldil didn't hesitate. He had spent 6 months working on it, but after what he had endured, he said he wasn't returning. His journey of survival had taught him more than he ever wanted to know about the strength of the human spirit. Aldil's incredible survival story reminds us that even when everything seems lost, we can always find the strength to hold on just a little longer. His story is about hope, courage, and the will to survive. These survival stories aren't just movies. They're real-life tests of human willpower and resilience. The lengths these survivors went to stay alive are beyond anything you could script. It's proof that truth is sometimes stranger and way more incredible than fiction.